Hello and welcome to the Soul Garden. This is the podcast for the Centre for Nature Connection and it's presented by me, Georgina Langdale. I've got a beautiful guest with me this week, Harriet Sams. Harriet is an archaeologist, an ecotherapist, a druid, and just all-round fabulous woman and wise soul. We have a really beautiful discussion around connection, sense of belonging, being part of the landscape, the stories that are told. I really encourage you to make a nice cup of tea, get yourself comfortable, settle in, and I know that you'll enjoy this beautiful, beautiful talk. I am really excited about today's program. I've got a very, very special guest, and we've been trying to do this conversation for quite a few months now, even, I think. And so I'd like to welcome Harriet Sams to the Soul Garden. Hi, Harriet. How are you doing?
I'm good. I'm really glad to be here.
So Harriet is based in France. Harriet, you're an archaeotherapist, a tutor, an intuitive guide, and so much more besides. I'm really looking forward to exploring some of that with you. Harriet and I first met through the Order of Bards, Ovates and Druids, and we are both on the Druid path. And we connected through that and found that there were just so many kind of interconnections between our lives and our work. So we just had to talk. And one of the big themes, I think, of today is about sense of belonging, our relationship with landscape, and things like how we are working with stuff like grief at a personal level and at a landscape level. So I'm going to start off with looking at the archaeology part of your beautiful CV. Can you tell us why you went down the archaeology route?
Well, yeah, that's been the core meandering path, I think, of my life. And when we were just discussing what would you like to be called, I was thinking that really, in a way, there's lots of sort of hanging fruit about what I could do and who I am. And if you look sort of at how they all connect, I think archaeology and ancestral connection to the land has been the key aspect of everything that I've done, really. But it all started, I suppose it all started in childhood, but for me, I think it really started when I was age 10 and the primary school took us on a field trip to the British Museum. And I was just blown away by it all. And I stood and looked at the Rosetta Stone. I think it was the Rosetta Stone, and I still remember it now. There was the ancestors were talking. It was the first feeling that I really strongly got that there was a mystery that could be solved, that the ancestors wanted to communicate. And that, as a small sort of 10-year-old mind, the translation aspect of, Greek and hieroglyphics and that sort of thing was just really clear to me. And then I went back home in Cumbria, where I grew up. And not long after that, probably, a few weeks, I think, some students knocked on the door and said they were from a university and that they were going to be digging an Iron Age well in the field next door. And they asked my mum, "Oh, is that your field?" And she said, "No, it's not. It's the farmer's field." So that was me trotting off, watching them all the time, just fascinated by this well they were excavating. And I think that was the first time I realised that archaeology was even a thing, that the connection that I was feeling to the landscape was it was possible to study it. It was possible to delve deeper, I think. And so on a sort of professional level, it was quite clear that I wanted to do that. And then I studied Greek at school, not for very long, but because I was really sure I wanted to be an archaeologist. And so I got someone to teach me Greek, and then, and then just subsequently sort of moved into it, got my first degree in archaeology. And it was just, I just really wanted to be connecting to the earth, and with my hands in the earth, I wanted to delve deeper into our ancestors. And it would, for me at that point, I think it was just clear that I was at peace when I was outdoors. I was at peace when I was just concentrating on a piece of land and connecting. And I just really loved it. And I got very good at telling different soils from one another. And I was intimately connected to what I was excavating. It was the land as well as the things that I was excavating. They were brilliant and they were great when I found things, but it was just being immersed in the succession in a way. It was, these things had happened long time ago, and what I was doing was excavating the land, healing that moment, and being fully immersed in that just really was where I wanted to be. Wow. So that's how I got into it.
Wonderful. I can really relate to that. I remember as a child, so I grew up in England as well. I'm English. And there were two things. One, there was a field farm next door to us. It felt odd for me as a child. And then I found out that there had been a battle there, and there was just sort of a burial pit in that field, and everyone had been kind of hurled into that. And it felt unresolved for me as a child, even just sensing something. So I got quite obsessed with with that, with no real ending to the story, sadly. Then the other thing, when I was at boarding school in Dorset when I was 7, there was a Roman villa being excavated just near the school. I could see it from my dormitory window, and we were allowed to go and help the archaeologists with this dig at this Roman villa. And I think wonder is a beautiful word, isn't it, for this work, of how we can uncover the ways that we as humans have interacted with our landscape. I'm really interested to know, though, because I know that you do a lot of this intuitive work. You've gone through the Druid training and you do ecotherapy and things. There's a very spiritual basis to you and to the work you do. How does that sit with the academia around archaeology for you? How did those two pieces come together for you?
The sort of the spiritual aspect was one of the things that I was really aware was missing when I became a sort of academic archaeologist and then a field archaeologist. I was very quickly taught that it was a sort of reductionist scientific kind of method, that we had carbon-14 and we had stratigraphy, which was all in little blocks, like this came first, then this came next, then this was cut, and then this was filled in. So it sort of really reduces the way that the earth is breathing its ancestry and the human connection. It reduces it completely to boxes and colours, and I learnt that was how I did it as a job. Right. I was really lucky that after I studied at Glasgow, my first paid job was in the Boyne Valley in Ireland.
Oh wow!
And looking back now, I just think, wow, how lucky to just turn up on the River Boyne and dig. And I was digging Neolithic villages which would have been the same age as the people who were putting up Newgrange. We're talking really early you know, stuff about the absolute origins of the fascination of that sort of mystic Celticism. And I just was so lucky. I was so lucky. I went into Newgrange itself. I just with a couple of colleagues, a couple of friends, we went in and we just got shown around, and you know, the real thing, which nowadays they've rebuilt it, and you can go in the visitor centre into this kind of mock-up copy, and you can watch the solstice, the winter solstice.
Could you, just for people who may not be familiar with Newgrange and its importance within these stories of us and landscape, could you describe Newgrange for people who are listening who may not know?
Newgrange is a burial chamber. It's a Neolithic burial chamber with a passage that faces what is in the northern hemisphere the winter sunrise, which is southeast. And there's the chamber itself, the burial chamber, is higher up, so you have to walk up an inside hill, and the doorway that you go into has a box above it, and the box is directly on the same line as the burial chamber. So the idea is you walk up the passage up into the burial chamber where your ancestors are, and then on the midwinter sunrise, the sun shines, slants its light straight through this box into and illuminates the back of this burial chamber. So it's an extraordinary piece of architecture, and it is such deep, clear, deep resonance and reverence for the ancestors and for the passage of time and the passage of winter. And that's one of the burial chambers, and there are two others. One's called Neath and one's called Dowth, and they both have beautifully carved rock art boulders outside, which depict all sorts of different motifs, so they're in themselves, they're absolutely fascinating as well. And Newgrange, if you ever get to see a picture of it, if you want to Google it, or Ecosia, it's got a white quartz stones all around the front of it, because when they excavated it in the 70s, it had all sort of collapsed a lot, and they found all of these quartz stones, and so they intuited and interpreted that they must have been on the front, very bright, so that sunrise would have not only filtered straight through into that burial chamber, but would have been absolutely blinding from anyone who couldn't see. So it's a cathedral of light. It's a cathedral of welcoming back the sun god of, you know, in the darkest moment of winter. Wonderful. So, and it's on the River Boyne. It's on quite upstream of the River Boyne. So at that point, the river's quite small and busy and shallow. But the Boyne herself, it's Bruna Boyne. I apologise to anyone who's a Gaelic speaker. She was a goddess. She was a fertility goddess, and one of the most important goddesses of early Irish mythology. So it was a very powerful and rare treat to be digging.
There's something very special about that as well. That's location next to a river named after a fertility goddess, and there it is as a burial ground. That really just that instinctive oneness of the circle of life, you know, celebrating kind of birth and reproduction and fertility alongside the laying down of elders is very, very powerful. When you're working on archaeological sites, and if we sort of delve down into landscape a bit more as well, and the courts really set me going on this. I love the idea and the feeling, the very visceral feeling we get of that sense of charge of place, that all of that healing and legend and stories and wisdom and things kind of gets not just written into stone, but is energetically within stone and with place. And, you know, we only need to see how quartz, for example, is used in modern technology and computer chips and all of this to pass and store communication around. So when we go into these sacred places, both new and old, where we feel and can sense that buildup of charge, of energy, of wisdom and things, with that meshing of your spiritual life and your archaeological academic life, how do you, if you don't mind me asking, personally approach working in these spaces?
That's a beautiful question, and I think it really speaks to what I crave, and I think my well-being depends on in many ways, which is that sort of edge space. I call it the kind of edge, you know, between where I live, how I live, my material life, and that kind of other world, to give it, you know, the numinous, that inexplicable energy that I've felt so many times in my professional career and in my personal experiences of life. And I think, you know, going back to your very early question of how does that mesh with, how does being an archaeologist, which can feel quite reductionist, be enmeshed in Druidry and my spiritual side of things. And I think it's the visiting of those sites and being open to them, which keeps it present for me. It keeps it relevant. It keeps it mysterious as well. You know, so that I don't become a sort of jaded archaeologist that's, you know, 2 weeks ahead of the bulldozers when a new housing estate is put in, but also not a cynic as well. I'm in love with these places, and the places know me. In many ways, I feel like the deep ancient side of me responds to the deep ancient side of that site, to that place. And it can happen in really, really obvious, powerful places like Newgrange, and it can happen in the least expected places. And maybe we'll get on to talk about it, but a lot of what I do is I work with wounded sites, difficult sites, more modern sites that wouldn't necessarily be seen as imbued with magic and mystery, because I really believe and have felt in many ways that site magic, as it were, site power, doesn't have to be because it's pristine or it's, you know, it's Newgrange or it's Stonehenge. It can be because there's a really powerful, sorrowful message there, or a message that the land and the earth, the human connection to it, is needing us to learn. And going back to what you were saying about that field next door with the pit, with the burial pit, that to me is a perfect example where it's there's a teaching for you, and akin to perhaps what you would call a healing medicine, but it's through a difficult moment in time, a difficult relationship to land, and the land doesn't know where it sits because maybe nobody's learnt the lesson yet, or maybe nobody's recognized what that place has to offer. Does that make sense? It's it makes sometimes
it makes total sense. And you're making me think of a whole bunch of things. One of the things is I love the idea that has been passed down through time, but Paracelsus in the 1500s wrote about it particularly beautifully, and he said, you know, we are all made, we all come from the same source. We are stardust, we're all prima materia, we are rock, we are tree, we are earth, and then we have spirit, a kind of world spirit, and then we have soul, and we have intellect. And I love that idea of really paying attention to the fact that we are rock, we are tree, we are sacred place, we are wounded place. And in understanding that oneness, great healing can occur, not just for us and for the landscape. You mentioned the word relevance before, and it made me think it's a good time to bring in the Druidry thing, I think, for both of us, and the why Druidry and why is it relevant now. Can you talk to me about your journey and the relevance of Druidry, and then I might share, I'm sure we'll be probably fairly synced up on this as well, but I'd love to hear your relevance, and I'd like to speak for a moment about mine too in modern times.
Sure. Yes, in going deeper, I feel like we're sort of cracking through some layers here.
Right.
Yes, I was wanting to find a deeper meaning to the archaeology that wasn't being spoken. So that was this kind of broiling feeling inside, how do I get to understand this sort of mystical, magical aspect of my landscape that is not being addressed? Yeah. So I thought, should I go down the, medieval historian route? Should I do this? Should I become a mythologist? And it didn't, none of it sort of really fit until the moment that I realized that I think Druidry was the thing that I needed to do. I was always very attuned to the earth, but there was one moment that really made me realize that there were more than there was spirituality that I needed to connect to. I'd just recently become a single mother, and I had a rare day off where I wasn't with my children. So I had a bath. I got in the bath. My ex had taken the car. I didn't have a car. So I was just relaxing in the bath. And this woman's voice said in my head, get out the bath, go up the fell, and you'll see what you have to see. And I just sort of had a sort of inner monologue and just said, I'm relaxing, I'm not getting out of the bath. Don't be daft, I'm not getting anywhere. Get out the bath, go up the fell, and you'll see what you have to see. And fell is Northern English for hill. So I said, okay, well, I haven't got a car. Well, how am I going to drive? Or it was 6 or 7 miles up, but I knew exactly which hill this voice was referring to. So I got on my bike and I cycled, and then I had to walk for 3/4 of a mile up to the top of this hill. And then I, puffing and panting, and I got to the top, and I sat on a rock, and it was a beautiful blue day, but it was a misty day. And to put this into context, I was in one of my absolute favorite places in Cumbria, which is up on the top of the northernmost Pennines. So below me was the Eden Valley, and then Carlisle, and then over in the distance, looking westwards, with the Cumbrian Fells, and they were just about visible. They were sort of shrouded in mist, this kind of warm haze that they were shrouded. But I was in that place, and I was just in that sort of zone of like, okay, what's going on? Why am I here? And I suddenly heard behind me this spray can, making a spray can noise. And I went and had a look, and there was this totally inappropriately dressed young man with sort of brown brogues on, spray painting onto the ground. And I just went up to him and I said, hello, what are you doing here? And he said, I work for the mobile phone company, and we're putting a mast up here, a mobile phone mast. And it had just so happened to be a Bronze Age burial mound. And I said, that's a Bronze Age burial mound. He said, oh, well, it's not on the maps. And because I'd been doing a lot of work archaeologically, I knew these sites, but I knew this one hadn't been registered. Right. So obviously his company had sort of looked to see what was registered, and that one hadn't been. And it had a very obscure reference in 1790 something that this was where burials had been found. So I just said, you can't put it here. You just simply can't put it here. And he said, well, I'm putting it here. We've been told to put it here because this is the best view for the valley. And I said, well, that's why our ancestors put them there. That's the point. Yeah. And I said, look, I'll get in touch with the county archaeologist and you just wait and we'll do all the paperwork and everything. So he scuttled on down the hill and I just ran down the hill, got on my bike and just zoomed back home and did what I needed to do. And subsequently they did do a review and they did put a mast up, but they put it somewhere slightly different. And they changed the foundations from it being a big solid concrete block to a less sort of invasive block.
Gosh.
And that was the moment when I just realized that this earth, this ancestry, this more than me and will be here forever after me, knew that I had the day off, that I had the skills, I had the knowledge, and I could do it. And I just still now feel so connected and so guided by that being, that spirit. And I have then I did subsequently go on my own druid path and joined OBOD and became a druid. And I dedicated to Bridget, the deity that I don't say that would be her because she's more than and not that, and all of those other sort of associations. She was just that voice of my ancestors on that land that day, and that's guided me. That being, that Bridget energy has guided me ever since. So that's the real reason.
Well, that's a fabulous story, and it's a real reminder for us to trust these voices that we hear inside of ourselves. Trust that urging onwards at times. It can take you to amazing places. Cumbria has a kind of connection for us as well. My surname is Langdale, and Langdale is one of the beautiful areas in Cumbria. And there are very high peaks there. And as an archaeologist, you will know this very well. But for those who don't, there are these very, very high peaks. And there's particular stone there that was used to make axes in Neolithic times. So, we're going way back to sort of 5,000 BC, waving my hand around here, hitting furniture. Anyway, so these beautiful axes were carved, and they're called the Langdale axes. And some were made for chopping down trees and doing all of that sort of thing. But there were some that had fishes and things in them, and the stone has a sort of greeny look, a kind of green stone. And I know that in my research, because I became completely fascinated about these, that they've been found around the British Isles and quite often in ceremonial places and stone circles and things. What I found interesting, returning to this prima materia idea, is this place, I have the name of that place. These incredibly beautiful axes were made, and maybe you might be able to say a little bit more about them. But also there was this sense of a real, almost like an odyssey. It was difficult to get to the place to get the stone to make these axes. And it was very high, and like your burial mound, there was this idea, I think, that the spirits would go up to the top of these peaks and go. What I find fascinating for me is here in 2021, when we're talking together, a lot of my work is about helping people navigate the end of life and after life. And I feel comfortable in this space, helping people at a very difficult time and trying to help make sense of that. And I use nature as a big part of that process. And I found myself thinking, if I am that rock, and I am that hill, and I am that sacred space, then no wonder this kinship and this knowledge and this wisdom of working in this space comes so easily. So for me, the druidry thing, I was 8 when we immigrated to New Zealand. When I was still in England, I had an experience that kind of cracked me open to the natural world and the power of healing within it through trauma. It was my kind of shamanic wound. But what I noticed was we're also fed this story that Western cultures, Northern European cultures have no nature-based, and I thought this can't be true. This just can't be true, because look around, you see things like Newgrange and stuff. There is a real connection to land, and we all had it. Just something got in the way. So for me, studying in Druidry was about reconnecting to my own ancestry and earth-based traditions. And it has been really beautiful. And in the same way, I encourage anybody to explore that land-based and their ancestry of their own culture and landscape. Just really opens things up, and it can become really healing. So I've been really enjoying the Druidry path. Feels very relevant in modern times because it helps for us in our British Isles context. It helps us with that reconnection with that past. I'm curious, do you have anything else that you would can say about things like the Langdale axes, seeing you're from Cumbria? What did that landscape do for you as a child? And as an archaeologist, is there any more you can add to the story?
There's so many things to sort of comment on about. First of all, I want to just actually take us up to the top of those mountains, the one where I got that kind of, you need to be here, the opposite. You're in the valley and you have to go up to the mountain, and that somehow that energy, that mountain goddess, came down into the valley and gave me her message and to take me back up to the top. And I think in a way that's kind of the opposite with Langdale, the axe heads. The people who extract them and work them, they work them up at the top of the mountain. And I've spent a lot of time mountaineering, and I know that, having lived in New Zealand myself for a while, how beautiful and mountainous it is. And anyone who has been close to and familiar with mountains knows that there are other gods up there. There are other gods at the top, and that you have to present exactly who you are on a mountain. You can't lie. You can't pretend on a mountain. Yeah. It will get you if you haven't got the right clothes, if you haven't been fed, if you hurt yourself, if you physically damage yourself, the mountain will find you out. Mountains have such really elemental energy. And I think if we look at the Langdale axe mythology, as it were, or the clues about that, it wasn't just extraction, because a lot of Langdale tuff, the volcanic tuff, is found all over the valley's floor because it's been taken down with erosion through the waters. So it's not a geological decision, it's a spiritual decision. And going up there is about not lying. It's about being fully present in the exposure and the presence of the gods, for want of a better word. 5,000 years ago, who knows what they called them or what kind of assumptions they were, but there was definitely a knowing that up there is not human. It's not where humans are meant to be. And I think that that's something that is death. Actually, I think that there is something there about that you bring back to the valley, which is comfort and food and love and warmth and laughter and song, and it's another world. And I think Druidry really reflects that. And I think one day, if we ever get over to Cumbria, I'll take you on a little magical mystery tour, and we can go up there and have a feel for that. And also what you said about how we're still talking about this in 2021. There's still this energetic pull of identity and belonging that goes through your bloodline, and it goes through my, being belonging on that landscape. It's not my bloodline is, I don't think, is the north of England, but I feel very connected to that space. And and I think when we put all of that together, and that the way I see it is, we can't extract humans from ecology. It was a broken duality to start with, and I think that the practice of archaeology really brings that home, that humans are in the niche to for better or for worse throughout our known time on this planet. And archaeology helps us understand that. And it also reflects back our ancestors. And so we've got not only earth connection and cultural connection, but we've got potentially real human mirroring in a way that, we can sit in nature, or in my case, go and be with the goddess. But it's not humans. It's not a human face that looks at me. It's another being. Yeah. And I think sometimes when we go and explore what remains of what humans have done, we do see a reflection of ourselves that is so important, so important that we do that. It can be really difficult. I'm not going to lie. Yes, archaeology can be very romantic, and it can be all about connecting to this long forgotten age where everything was great and they all knew how to do things. But the truth is, that's not how it was.
Yeah.
And we have to learn the messy stuff, and we have to learn the lessons as well.
You're making me think. I've been reflecting, because at the moment the climate change COP26 meeting is just getting underway, and I used to work for the UN Environment Programme, and before that for Kew Gardens, and so over a decade ago, we were trying to the work I was doing, we were trying to make an economic case for conservation of nature, because it seemed that economics was the only language that governments and business policy mechanisms may understand. And I found myself over the last few days thinking about storytelling, and that in today's world, targets just aren't going to be the things that are going to get us the whole way to creating the change we need to kind of bring things back into balance. That story is a big part of it. And I think one of the things I love about what archaeology does do, and druidry, and any of these sort of different nature-based traditions, depending where you are in the world, is they reconnect you to story. We and when we're reconnected to story, we see how important landscape is to our cultural identity, to our story, to our rituals and ceremonies, big and small. But the other thing I found myself thinking was, if we are this microcosm of the macrocosm, back to those sort of medieval concepts, and it touches on your thing about the wounded places in the landscape. It's not just us who needs those stories, it's the landscape too. If we think of the Aboriginal songlines, I feel we all need to sing our landscapes back into being. And in the same way as the stories that they show us about us reflecting them back to those landscapes, I do think is part of that healing this world. So when I hear your word, which I love, of archaeotherapy, I see it as a very, it's as much about the land, those wounded places that you referred to, as it is about people. And I, in my own way, work with it in my practice with people, and I know you do as well. Could you say a little bit more, if that is resonating with you, with this idea of healing the landscape?
Yeah. And I wanted to say how I love that the land is the unifying thing, that I hope that other listeners will hear this. But you and I, you work, as you say, with people at the end of life and that sort of thing, and I work with the sort of the ancestors and the past, and bringing that into living, and really giving us a sense of being fully alive and being fully grounded on this earth. I'm sure that there's lots of other ways of manifesting that. The archaeotherapy, it's very similar to cultural heritage therapy, which has existed for a little while, and that sort of assumes that that we can gain a lot of well-being from all sorts of ways of connecting to the past and heritage, and that can be used therapeutically. So that could be, for instance, as you know, talking about medieval ways of thinking and philosophy. So that's actually, in a way, cultural heritage therapy, where we pick up a book from the 17th century and read it, and that can be very therapeutic. So what I work with is more the sort of intuitive aspect of quite bespoke connection to the human-made landscape. So that could be, somebody goes to Stonehenge, for instance, somewhere really well-known site with healing connotations and healing expectations, and they can say, and I was, healed in some way. This experience happened, and I felt better. Or what really fascinates me is when we go to difficult places in the landscape, which have a personal feeling or personal story. So, for instance, a client, she actually worked with a supermarket. And you'd think, well, what's so archaeological or what's so therapeutic about going around the back of a supermarket? But what it was built on the meadow that she grew up on. Oh, so she said, I remember when this was buttercups, and I remember when I sledged down it as a child in the winter, and the ash tree that we climbed up. And so her connection was the fact that landscape had gone entirely. The biodiversity of that space had gone, and her childhood memory had gone. It was just in her head. It was just left in tiny little memories that she had. And that can be very difficult for people. The first key to it is recognizing that we as a culture, we as human beings, I think it's possibly a human trait, but I know from a Western point of view, is that we are really good at adapting. So if something happens and radically changes our landscape, we sort of can get upset about it for a little while, but then we just change and we go, okay, well, that's what it is now. But because it's happening so fast now, I mean, since sort of, the big, explosion after the Second World War, really, of technology and development, people are now losing sites and losing their memory and their landscape on a huge scale. Or they move to a place that has sort of orphaned places, cordoned off zones where one just doesn't go. You go to the nice places, you go to the shopping area, and you go to the park, and and it's like we're really good at adapting ourselves. So that work where actually we can say, how can you have still a relationship with a place that is so radically changed? And that's where the therapy really lies, and that's where it is reciprocal, because the land underneath Tesco's or whatever supermarket it was, the land underneath the supermarket is sacred. Is her place. And that reciprocity becomes manifest when we pay attention to it.
And also what I'm hearing you saying, in doing that, it helps us nurture that landscape within our own soul, where it still remains as it was when it was a meadow with buttercups and an ash tree. So being able to heal and to connect into that world within us, in shamanic time, there is no such thing as time, really, is it? We can move backwards and forwards. I could imagine that would be very beautiful for someone. I work a lot with nature in all my stuff, and the thing that has been really beautiful, putting it into that end of life context, we keep coming back to burial mounds, I think, is a comment that I get time and time again from students going through my training, is they say things like, I came to do this course to learn how to care for somebody else, the end of their life. But the way that you've connected me to nature and to landscape is showing me so much more about how I live my own life. And I'm now living it with a sense of wonder. Can you describe what wonder looks for you like in this crazy old world we have right now?
Yeah, it sits actually with what you said just before, which I kind of didn't fully answer, but I think my answer that I gave about the woman with the meadow really speaks to it, which is storytelling. That if there's one thing that we need right now is individual stories, so that we don't just lose them in that kind of overwhelming sense of racing impotence, that there's nothing we can do about all of this, that what once was is no longer, and that I don't belong and I don't matter because I don't belong, and therefore as a collective we have no power, or we have no sense of being. And I think that really at the deepest wound, we can take a meadow away and put a supermarket on the top, but at the absolute deepest wound, there's a sense that the human story doesn't matter, that I as a child, that I as a person who wants to live this way with land doesn't matter, because the sort of the powers, the economic powers that you referred to when you were doing your work with the UN, they win. And there's a hunch that maybe that's the truth, oh well, they maybe know, and maybe my story doesn't matter. And I would say again and again and again, bring it back to the story, bring it back to the I. Keep your sense of your story, because we can't bring that meadow back. But if you keep that it will help others who will go through that. This is the truth of it. We all have, unless we're hyper privileged and live on a desert island, we all have lost and suffered and grieved for a land that has been radically changed and radically wounded, and that can be as small as seemingly as litter on the side of the road that just hurts, to real loss of land, loss of ancestry, loss of sovereignty, and I think that really wonder can only sit when we hear the story. It sits in our true connection to that space, to that individual, and that gives me the hope, I think, as well, that I think to wrap it all up and to say, where's this going, what am I doing with my world, what's the purpose? It's not to reconstruct or pretend that we live in the pristine past. It's not. It's to say that ancientness has a terrible, terrible relevance now. It's so important.
Yeah.
And I think that's the thing that keeps me going.
Great.
Wonder and stories.
Yeah, wonder and stories. So for people that are listening to this and hopefully things are resonating. I think some of the messages that they're very strongly getting are tell the stories, be in the landscape, feel the soil. And in our own way of healing, helping heal the landscape, we're healing ourselves. And that could be, join a local conservation group and do some replanting work, or cleaning up waterways, or taking kids on wonder walks, whatever it may be. Can you just say where people can find you and what you can offer them? And I'm sure people would love to know. They'll be fascinated to learn more.
I'm currently teaching for the Tariki Trust, so people can come and join workshops. The trust itself is an ecotherapy and psychotherapy training trust, but I offer standalone workshops as well. So people are very welcome to come to that. That's the Tariki Trust, Tariki.
Okay,
they're based in Leicester in the UK, but we do online work.
Great.
I've got a website myself, which is Newgrange, which is a Welsh word. So it's I don't know if I can spell it. NWYFRE-earth.co, and people can come onto there and just connect with me and ask for one-to-one work, guide intuition, and guided coaching.
Right.
And I currently work very closely with Radical Joy for Hard Times, which is the eco-spirituality charity that is quite rare. There's not very many who specifically work with wounded sites and storytelling and making meaning in wounded sites. So if anybody is quite interested in that side of things and would like to know how to do a little bit of the practice in making ritual and meaning and storytelling at wounded sites, it might be really good for them to go to that. And that's www.radicaljoy.org. Wonderful.
That's really wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing this this hour or so with me. I might leave one of the last words to Einstein, because he said, look deep into nature. The deeper you look into nature, the more you will understand everything better. Harriet Sams, thank you so very, very much. And I hope maybe we should put our heads together. I'm just going to float this idea out there with everyone. I would love for us maybe somehow to do something online together for people. Maybe we could put that in our little thinking caps.
Yes.
And perhaps create something. And I look forward to exploring Langdale with you in the UK sometime in the future.
Yeah, I think all of that is a wonderful thing. And thank you so much for inviting me on.
It's an absolute.
It's been a joy. It really has.
Oh, good. Wonderful. Okay. Thank you very, very much. I just absolutely loved having that discussion with the gorgeous Harriet Sams, and I'm really looking forward to collaborating with her in the future. I've put her websites in the program notes for you here. Also, if you're interested in my offerings of coaching and training and guidance, you can find my offerings at the Centre for Nature Connection, and the website is georginalnature.com. If you know somebody that you think would enjoy this program, please do share the link and point them in this direction. We'd love to welcome them here. I hope you have a beautiful week. Take care of yourself, and bye for now.